Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Ty. Our guest today is Kathie Jones, Chief Financial Officer at Eptura. In this episode, Kathie shares her journey from accountant to CFO, highlighting the skills and mindset shifts required to thrive in finance leadership. She discusses the value of mentorship, storytelling, and team development, while emphasizing the importance of soft skills in building trust and collaboration across departments. Now, our host, Jotham Ty.
Hey, Kathie, welcome to the Accounting Live podcast. Thanks for making it today.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Kathie, I am a sucker for great accounting stories. I think my colleagues and my friends know that about me. Without really diverging into too random details, the types of movies that I love the most are like the Forrest Gumps and the Benjamin Buttons, where kind of follow someone through a journey in life. And I don't think it's any different in accounting, right? We all have different paths that are unique, but there are definitely some standard paths that people take to get to a CFO role. So in this conversation, I wanted to get your perspectives on what worked for you and maybe advice that you have for fellow listeners who are looking to follow that same trajectory.
I would say, so I started out traditional, the accounting side right out of school. That's the path that I took. And then I started to kind of meander because I always knew I wanted to kind of, how far could I go in my career? And so I did a couple of things. One thing I would say was I started to try and find mentors that, people I looked up to, especially whether they were controllers or CFOs, and be like, what skills do I need to be able to get to this higher level? And, what I heard kind of resounding by many people was you have to have more than accounting skills by far. You have to be able to have the financial planning and analysis skills. So if you have never spent time in FP&A, you either need to spend time in FP&A or work in an FP&A role or become, asked to spend time with the FP&A team, learn from them, whether it's one day a week or work on a project with them, as well as, really getting exposed to business operations. As we talked about a little bit earlier was, the CFO role now is not just financial reporting. It encompasses, like right now, I have business operations, I have legal, I have the biz apps team, data, making sure the data governance and the warehouse. So going back, besides business operations exposure, revenue exposure, like make sure you understand how the company makes money, not just from the accounting side, but from the time a customer is a prospect to the time it gets closed. What is that process? And, yes, you need to be exposed to legal. You need to know HR. You need to have M&A experience. At some point in your CFO life, you as the CFO need to make those decisions sometimes. If the ultimate goal is the company to get sold, or the goal is we want to grow, M&A is always something that you should be looking at and know how that would fit into the company's growth pattern. And storytelling, I would say.
Oh, goodness.
Anybody can report the news, right? You can look back and say, here's the historical, you tell the board, you talk to your CEO, but the ones that can tell the story and not just rote report, here's what revenue was, here's what EBITDA is, blah, blah. Weaving the story and crafting, here's what the future looks like, and here's what I see based on looking in the rearview mirror instead of just focusing on the rearview mirror.
Kathie, if I could add to that point, and I do want to highlight a couple other points you made after, just a quick example of the importance of telling a story, right? And I know as CFO or finance professionals, we're obviously have to be very adept at numbers, but the storytelling these days, it's so critical. And I remember when we were first fundraising here at Gapify, I know you know us from early on, we had pretty good metrics. We had really great metrics of growth, had some great logos, but I really didn't know how to put that story together. So a lot of my pitches fell flat because of it. And it wasn't until I got a mentor on pitching where it was, unveiled to me that the trailer approach to telling a story was critical in that first pitch. And in addition to a lot of tactics, I think that is such a huge, important advice. And I wanted to highlight that again for our listeners because I think one would think it's all about the numbers, but if you can't tell a story with those numbers, it's like, what are those numbers for, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned role models and mentors, which I'm also a big believer of. And actually, I know we both know KJ. We actually did a podcast on this very topic previously. But in your journey as a CFO, like what kind of, or actually maybe even broadening this out for just in general, like what kind of mentors should an accountant looking to be in a CFO role look for? Is it another CFO? Is it just someone to talk to about just expanding into different areas?
It doesn't necessarily have to be a CFO, although I think that's very beneficial. But I'll give an example that was just so amazing to me early in my career. I worked for this engineering construction company. It was about 450 people when I joined. And the controller, she had brown bag lunch on Wednesdays. And all you had to do was bring your lunch, and she would teach you anything you wanted to know about the business. So not just accounting, licensing, reading contracts, understanding insurance, benefits, 401k plans, all these things that you don't get exposed to, especially as a 23-year-old,
Oh yeah.
But that was just such an amazing experience for me. And I was there every Wednesday, and the accounting department was like 8. And after about a year, I was the only person that still kept going and was just hungry for that knowledge. So I think, it's showing that you're hungry for the knowledge and you want to learn, finding somebody who wants to coach you. I was just fortunate that I had that in the beginning, but also I think it's important to have people that are outside of accounting so that you get the business side of the house as well.
I agree because truth be told, a lot of us accountants have similar ways of thinking about growth in our professions. And if you get an outside perspective, especially as you described earlier, the CFO role is so diverse these days. It's not just financial prowess, it's operational knowledge, it's strategic M&A. Getting yourself outside your box through mentors outside of accounting and finance could be very beneficial. So I think that's a very unique, but I think very important takeaway here for our audience. You're as an executive and as a CFO, you're you should have a lot of knowledge outside of just finance. And I think aligning yourself with someone who has done that outside of finance could be very helpful. I want to go back to something you touched on earlier too, because it comes up a lot when people ask accountants specifically who are looking to go up the CFO path, like how important is FP&A and having that experience in qualifying to be a CFO. So obviously there's the budget piece and the things that are obvious said to us in accounting when we're partnering with them during a month-end close. But how would you articulate in your own words why FP&A experience is important to achieving a CFO role someday?
I think it's very important because besides like what you were talking about, it's the ability to look forward and understanding modeling and sensitivity analysis and the what ifs scenarios. And, accounting minds are generally, like I said, you're reporting the news and the historical. And so it's that ability to use your brain and switch to the forward looking and really understanding all the levers that go into the business model, in software, like, that we're in, you start with that capacity modeling, you take your sales and the quotas and how much capacity do I have? And so that capacity I have is now, building your QAM, your quota attainment model. And then from that, you're building your high level bookings. And then what comes down from that, and that's completely different way of thinking than just my revenue, my GAAP revenue down. And from the storytelling aspect is like that forward looking and sensitivity. And, in my brain, I still go from, and you're flipping the forecast every month, right? You go from your 1 + 11 to your 2 + 10 to 3 + 9 as you're going through the year. And, again, I am the person when I'm flipping that forecast with the FP&A team that I'm telling the story of what I see in the business and why the forecast is rolling up to what it's rolling up to. I need to know the sensitivity around debt covenants. I need to understand the sensitivity analysis, So I think it's hyper critical because that CFO, is pulling all the levers of the business. And if you don't understand the forward-looking model, how do you know what levers you can pull?
I'll summarize there because I think it is a critical point. Us accountants, we're trained to report the news, as you say. And I think the practice of reporting the news is very different from computing and projecting into the future. And just because we're great at spreadsheets as accountants doesn't mean we have all the necessary attributes and skills and knowledge of calculation types to model out more complex like business forecasting methods. So yeah, I think as a CFO, obviously you need to be able to do both, like understand what happened and be able to articulate what you think will happen in the future. And I love how you wrap that up with the point again of like storytelling, right? So you do this model, this great 3-year model, but if the narrative around it doesn't really tie for some reason, then it won't resonate as much to the person receiving that information. So I think for our accounting audience out there, I think that's also a very like practical, simple way of putting it. The ability to project into the future and tell a story is the experience that you get in FP&A, and that's why it's critical in one's journey to become the CFO. Got another question for you, Kathie. We talked about storytelling, and feel free to continue on that track. But qualitative skills, soft skills, obviously in accounting, and I think it's different now from when I first started my career 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I had my cube. It was this high, and we just crunched numbers and looked
just
at a
sat
cube
there.
plant. But these days, it's more collaborative. But I think there's probably another level of collaboration and soft skills that are needed for obviously an executive position. So if you can articulate for our audience, like, what are those types of skills that you would focus on if you want to get to a CFO role someday?
I would say, you're only as good as your team. So you need to surround yourself with A players because you can't be the CFO and be in all the meetings and do the planning and all the things you're doing if you can't rely on your team underneath you. And, back to the investing in mentoring. So you as CFO should be mentoring in your team and ensuring that they are getting the exposure to what they want exposure to throughout the business. I would say, one thing that I love to do is I bring people into meetings that they normally wouldn't have an invite to. Get them exposure to different experiences. Your role as CFO is to move rocks for the team and move rocks for the business. Partnering with your C team, partnering with, the leadership team below, like the VPs, the director levels. Like I am somebody that they know they can call. I am having one-on-ones with people across the business because you need to build your personal capital throughout the organization. You need to build that you are somebody that can be trusted. You need to build that you are somebody that is there to support the business because a lot of times, right, people think you're CFO. No. Typically people in finance and accounting, our first initial reaction is to say no. It's no because of GAAP. It's no because of this, rev rec rules or whatever. And I have always tried very much to be like, I want to be CFO, yes, right? Of course, to a point. Sometimes there's rules, legal or truly rev rec or GAAP that's going to make the decision. But before I give that decision of no, I will explain why and pick up the phone, or I will get on a Zoom with them and say like, hey, let me walk you through the reason, or maybe if we structure this a little differently, then we can make this happen, right? So it's being that partner to the business that I think makes CFOs successful. And that soft skill is being able to bridge and speak normal speak, right? Because people don't understand the accounting finance jargon. So how do you bring it down to a level that everybody you speak to is going to understand what you're saying? And then, break it down for them and work with them so that they get to the point where they're comfortable with you and that they're going to bring problems to you. Like the worst thing to me is if somebody knows that there's an issue and they don't bubble it up. Like bad news doesn't age well, right? So like I want
Yeah.
people to be comfortable to bring anything to me, whether it's good news or bad news, and that they know I'm going to partner with them to fix it.
What I'm hearing is really a recognition as a finance leader that you are talking to different types of people. And so you have to have the skills to build and also the credibility to be able to partner with these different people effectively. Very, very different in accounting, right? Because most of the folks that you're partnering with are fellow accountants in your team. And yeah, sometimes there's collaboration with different departments, but an executive role, it really is, trying to work with a diverse group of people, and that's what makes. I know, also, of course, CFOs. It's not all fun, I'm sure, and roses,
No.
right? But I think as an executive myself, like I feel like I'm growing as a person because I have to collaborate with folks that didn't come from my same background. And I think what you share that there is important, especially the credibility part. I remember actually I had another guest on a recent episode that talked about how easier it was for him as a controller to start a new company because the CFO was already there for 5 years. So the CFO had built rapport, and therefore his job was easier because it allowed him to just collaborate with different people because there's already that trust established. And it's just like really interesting, like to speak to all these dynamics, right? Because in my journey, and before I was a founder, I think the highest level I got to was like senior manager. Like you really don't think much about what's going on out there, and the things that you describe, I can relate to now as an executive founder myself. But for those that are listening to the show today, I think it connects with your previous suggestion with having a mentor to describe all these things for you, because a lot of these are like you wouldn't really expect until you really ask someone like what goes on with that role. And I think for us accountants too, we tend to think that it's just like a step-by-step process. You achieve these accomplishments and you pick up this certification or skill, you pick up this experience, and then you can get there. But there's a whole nother people aspect to this. I see you
I was
shaking
like,
your head.
no. And it's work. Like I would absolutely say, I had to learn the hard way in my 20s. I became a manager. I had a team. And in my 20s, I was all about like, I want to prove myself. I'm going to take on special projects and get promoted and do all these things. And, I did that, but I didn't take my team along for the ride with me. And then when I got promoted, they all hated me, and I was like, wow, what did I do wrong? And in my 30s, it became about, oh, I need my team. There's no I in team. I need to be an empathetic leader. I need to, lead from the front. I need to so really changed my style in my 30s. And then by my 40s, it was like, wow, the soft skills are way more important. Like it's price of entry, right? It's price of entry in accounting or finance that you are good with the numbers, that you can
Right.
produce financials, that you can, that's price of entry. The hard part is the soft skills and developing the leadership skills. And that really differentiates the accountant to controller, the accountant to CFO, is the soft skills.
It's not so much how quickly you could put together a spreadsheet or how
Nope.
fancy your VLOOKUP formulas are. It's not how much you know 606. It's about how you can get your people and your team and elevate them, because that is the way an organization succeeds and not an individual. Oh my gosh, Kathie, that's like, yeah, I've done a few episodes about, development, but yeah, I'm really glad we're talking about this, because that to me is like one of the blind spots that a lot of us accounting professionals have. And we could probably do a whole nother episode of why it is this way. And I think part of it too is kind of the environment that we are in early in our careers in accounting. But yeah, I think if there's one big takeaway today for our audience, it's placing a lot of value on team development and soft skills and communication skills. As we wrap up here today, Kathie, any final thoughts or pieces of advice along those topics?
Yes.
For our audience?
I have one more. Something that I've done probably in the last 10 years is to celebrate the wins along the way, right? In accounting and finance and biz apps and whatever, we're the engine that keeps the business running. And a lot of times, even myself, I've been guilty in the past, like we don't celebrate the quarter ends and the audit being completed and we just are like, it's another month close, another quarter close, and we don't take the time to recognize all the work that goes into that. And it's a lot. We all know it's a lot. And so I've really been focusing on celebrating the wins and giving recognition and having like corporate ops heroes on a quarterly basis and giving out spot bonuses and having the team, nominate people because oftentimes we don't celebrate and we need to. And we need to make sure that that's part of the process of all the work we do.
I absolutely love that. And I'm like going back to my own accounting days where the CFO ever goes to my cube and wants to talk to me, my first instinct is probably, oh my gosh, I did something wrong. And it sounds like that's, usually the type of recognition that we typically get in accounting. But yeah, if you're an accountant and you're progressing in your leadership journey to become a CFO, a great way of, kind of packaging some of the things that you talked about today is celebrating those wins within your team. And that helps kind of give them the motivation to continue elevating like each other. That is such great advice. And it's actually inspiring me now, Kathie, at Gapify. Maybe we can come up with some kind of close hero award. Like I think no issues in a close is something to be celebrated about. It takes a lot of work to get a close right. And just because, it doesn't result in any kind of, revenue growth directly, although I would argue there's probably a way to get there, it needs to be celebrated. Yes. So you're giving me some ideas there, Kathie. That's an awesome suggestion. Kathie, this has been a lot of fun. And I think I'm thinking about different topics for a future episode. I hope to have, you're welcome back to the show anytime, but I've got some topics that might bring you back here.
Would love to, Jotham. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for joining. We'll talk soon.
Thanks for stopping by. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want more information, please check us out at gapify.com, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.